Hi, everyone. Welcome to CANiVISION. I am Michele Ching. I'm your host. And today I'm so excited to introduce our guest, Dr. Tim Hsu, the creator and owner of VETCDB. Hi, Dr. Hsu. Nice to see you again.
Hey, Michelle. Good to see you. How you doing?
Good. So right as we are getting kicked off, why don't I go ahead and introduce you to the audience for those of us who don't already know you and your background. So just really quickly, Dr. Tim Hsu is the founder and chief executive officer of VETCDB. Dr. Hsu founded VETCDB so pets could safely benefit from the multiple therapeutic uses of cannabis. By combining his expertise in veterinary medicine with his knowledge of medical cannabis, Dr. Hsu formulates VETCDB products to be safe and effective for use in animals. His interest in animal health and welfare from an early age led him to Texas A&M University's College of Veterinary Medicine, where he earned his doctorate in veterinary medicine. Prior to founding VETCDB, Dr. Hsu practiced emergency, critical care, and general medicine, frequently working with low-income clients to provide optimal healthcare on restricted budgets. Dr. Hsu's work on cannabis and pets has garnered international attention and has been featured by the Today Show, CNBC, NPR, and the New York Times. Dr. Hsu, I'm so excited to be getting to reconnect with you during the holidays.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate everything that you guys do and informing the pet owners and people in general about the benefits of cannabis.
Yeah, so it's great. First of all, I think everybody on the CannaVision team knows that here on the West Coast, we are very pet friendly, in a lot of cases, very dog friendly. So we're just so excited about the work and your contribution to pet health overall. And of course, infusing cannabis is part of that. But before we kind of get into the meat of the subject around pets and holiday health and things that we should be thinking about, I was just curious if maybe we could learn a little bit more about you and your background, and maybe what got you into this work in the first place. I mean, just going over your bio, you've got such an extensive history with working with so many different types of animals and families. So I'm just a little curious kind of what called you to do this work in the first place.
Yeah, so the whole reasoning behind it is that if cannabis has therapeutic benefits, then we really need to explore it, right? Because as healthcare practitioners, that's the duty that we have, is to be able to explore all potential therapeutic modalities and find out if they actually have benefit. And if they don't have any benefit, then we need to be able to say that. We need to be able to say, okay, we've looked through it and, it doesn't seem like it has any benefit or any uses. But if it does, if it has benefits, then we absolutely need to be able to provide that information, but then also provide the means and the access to be able to utilize it so that they can actually get those benefits. Because, it's kind of a halfway measure if we're saying, okay, yeah, it has a lot of benefits. It can, help with this and this and that. But then it's like, well, how do you get it? How do you use it? And then if you say, well, I don't know, well, that's really a halfway measure, and it's not really doing the person or the pet owner or the pet any good to do that. So I wanted to be able to fully explore the therapeutic value of this plant.
That makes so much sense. And let me just go back even further. When you first got into veterinary medicine, did you start with this ambition to start including more holistic health options like cannabis, or kind of what called you to go from maybe more traditional veterinary medicine paths and now introducing and integrating cannabis as part of your offering, as part of your service?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So my background is, I'm a scientist first and foremost. I was first a computer scientist, and then I went to and became a veterinarian. And so the way that I think is always, very logical, and I have always a healthy sense of skepticism. So, that's the way that I approach things is, if someone makes claims, then I want to see those claims backed up. I want to see the research that's behind those claims. And so that was, when I went through veterinary school, we actually didn't learn about any therapeutic benefits of cannabis. We were only taught about cannabis in toxicology course. So, that was my exposure to cannabis when I was in vet school. Right after graduating vet school, I moved to California. And it was when I moved to California, then I started getting exposed to the therapeutic benefits of cannabis because I saw that it was being used for all of these medical conditions in humans. And so my thinking was, well, what if we could find a way to be able to use cannabis to benefit animals without getting them high, without them having to feel any of the side effects that people feel from THC. And there are actually ways to be able to do that, and it does work remarkably well in animals, just like it does in people. And a lot of these conditions that animals are using it for end up being life-saving. So it's been quite a remarkable journey.
That's so interesting. So you were kind of trained educationally to only see cannabis as something to deal with from like a toxicology standpoint, but then it turned out that when you started learning more about the science behind cannabis, and I'm sure our pets' endocannabinoid systems, that you started to see, well, actually there are some therapeutic opportunities here. And I think what I heard you say is that you shifted kind of your thinking about it and kind of took it upon yourself to really take that education and integrate it into a product and a service. That's really cool.
Yeah. So, what's really remarkable is that, so when I was going through veterinary school, we didn't learn anything about the endocannabinoid system. And when it comes to the cannabis plant, the only part of the cannabis plant that we learned about was THC. And that was taught in toxicology course. So, we didn't learn about the other molecules in THC, like this, CBD, CBC, CBG, et cetera. And we didn't learn anything about the endocannabinoid system. And that's, to me, was one of the most remarkable things, is this entire body system that's deeply intertwined with our physiology that has been known since the 90s. We were not taught in veterinary school about that system. And even when I talk to doctors, nurses, veterinarians nowadays that have recently graduated, a lot of them still tell me that they haven't learned about the endocannabinoid system in school. And the way that I see it is, well, imagine if your doctor never learned about the endocrine system in school and they didn't know what hormones were. That's pretty much where we're at right now in terms of the state of medicine, is that there's an entire body system that affects so many different functions, from ranging from things like mood, memory, and appetite, sleep, and we're not learning about it. So, if we're not learning about it, we're doing a real disservice to the patients that we consult and treat, because this is something that we need to be able to integrate into practice.
I love the way that you stated it. And I love the way that you gave the analogy of, imagine going to medical school and not learning about the endocrine system. You're missing a huge component part of wellness and well-being. So that makes complete sense. And it actually is a really great segue into my next question. You talked about how the endocannabinoid system really supports so many different functions, mood, memory, sleep, and things of that nature. Now, when I hear mood, memory, sleep, or things like that in more common, popular context, right? Now you're talking about things like mental health. So it's interesting because, a lot of us, especially during quarantine, we saw the adoptions and foster numbers actually increase in a really great way for pets, and specifically like dog shelters, because I volunteer with a dog rescue organization, and we had a moment where we couldn't even fill the amount of foster and adopt requests we were getting, which was a great problem to have. And so what we've really seen, and we don't know the science behind it, but maybe you do, is that there's a clear connection between pets and human mental health. And I was curious if you've studied that, reported on that, or what your experiences when you think about the pet-human relationship as it relates to overall well-being and mental health and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually been a lot of studies that have looked into this. And what the studies have shown is that when people have pets, when they have that human-animal bond and connection, they actually feel less stress. They actually feel happier. And it actually increases their overall well-being. So it's actually, it's really remarkable that, our connection and our bond with these animals actually helps us and them to live better, happier, healthier lives.
And that makes sense too, right? Because in a lot of cases, I mean, I'm obviously thinking about dogs in this sense, but like they're pack animals. So are human beings. We are social mammals at the end of the day. So having that co-regulatory, like psychological connection is really, it's really interesting. And I think it's really exponentially more interesting, or I guess incrementally more interesting, when you take into account that your endocannabinoid system, or I should say our endocannabinoid systems, like the humans and the pets, are getting support through other things like the obviously connection between humans and pets, but then also things like CBD. Like it's like there's a weird intersection here that I feel like needs to be highlighted, like thinking about nurturing your endocannabinoid system through pet CBD or pet-based cannabis and things of that nature. And then also how overall well-being is nurtured through the human-pet relationship. I feel like it kind of creates this cool little ecosystem.
Yeah, and because the thing is that the endocannabinoid system is deeply intertwined with all other physiological systems. So it's not just this system that sits by itself. It's not siloed, and that's why you're starting to hear more and more the term endocannabinoidome, because it's what we're seeing is that cannabinoids don't just interact with the endocannabinoid system; they actually interact with a lot of other systems and a lot of other receptors. So it's something that is mixed in with the cardiovascular system, the neurological system, the GI tract, the endocrine system, your skin. So it plays a huge role in the overall health of a person and an animal.
I love that. So you mentioned the ECS not really being, first of all, I love that you also called it the endocannabinoidome. So you mentioned all of that not really being taught in veterinary school. That's also happening, obviously, in medical schools at large. But for you, because you're actually a product formulator, when you start thinking about ECS innovation, which I guess anything now is probably considered an innovation because we're so at the beginning of studying the system, even though thousands of studies have been done, we're still sort of at the beginning, if you will, of really understanding what that means, both for humans and for pets. So when you think about innovation as it relates to the ECS, what are some of the things that you're really interested in or motivated to learn more from, or maybe testing out yourself right now?
So one of the things that we're looking at is we're looking at different formulations. So what's really remarkable about cannabis in general is that it's a little, the way that it's done is a little bit backwards. So the market actually moves faster than a lot of the science does. And so what I mean by that is you have multiple different cannabinoids that are commercially available. So you can go out there, you can buy CBG and CBC and CBN, but in terms of the numbers that have actually been performed on those cannabinoids, especially clinical studies, there's hardly anything out there. Even when it comes to CBD, there's a lot of preclinical studies out there. So studies that have been done in, lab animals like mice and rats or petri dishes. But in terms of actual clinical studies, there's not that many. And the reason why is because of the laws and regulations against cannabis that have been going on for, the past almost 100 years. So it's a little bit backwards in that we're seeing the market develop and move so rapidly and faster than a lot of the science out there. So what we're doing is we're looking at the science behind these cannabinoids and how it can interact with specific species, and then also what disease processes may be augmented or changed or improved by these different formulations, whether it's cannabinoids or terpenes or flavonoids, because we know that the cannabis plant has over 500 different phytochemical compounds, but we know very little about what a lot of these compounds do. Most of it has been centered around THC and CBD, but there's still an entire world of compounds from the cannabis plant to explore.
So that might be, if it's okay, I'd love to unpack that a little bit more. Do you think about, like, now that you brought up different cannabinoids, does that mean that you recommend or advocate more so for full spectrum or more so for isolates because maybe there's more studies that have been done on one or the other, or you've seen more effective results between one or the other?
Yeah, so what we've seen in the science is that full spectrum outperforms isolates. So, there's the theory of the entourage effect, which is that multiple cannabinoids and phytochemical compounds from the cannabis plant used together actually create a synergistic effect and outperform individual isolated cannabinoids. We've seen that in our clients, but we've also seen it in multiple studies that have been done. A lot of these are done in preclinical models like mice and rats, and it's mostly when they're looking at things like pain and inflammation, but they are seeing benefits in something that is full spectrum compared to something that's isolate. And there's also been a study looking at seizure control in people, and what they found was that people that were using full spectrum CBD actually had better seizure control and decreased side effects compared to people that were using isolates.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because I feel like I hear the same thing. Well, you just used a human reference as well. So I hear a lot of the same thing when we're talking about humans. But when you brought up the individual cannabinoids as a pathway for innovation, I guess my curiosity was, what are you seeing? And maybe this is a bit of a selfish question because I've got two rescue pups myself and they are big CBD fans, or well, we give them CBD. But I just wasn't sure if like, should I, and we also do full spectrum, but now I'm just thinking about it out loud. I'm kind of like, should I be how should I be thinking about their use of CBD? For us, we use CBD for holidays, especially. So like 4th of July fireworks, right? Anything else that like we think might be high anxiety, like spiking moments for the pups. But when you're advising patients, like, are there specific things, dosage wise, or kind of like just considerations that you would suggest pet owners to think about as they're supporting their pet health with CBD?
Yeah, so well, one of the most common questions that people have, whether it's for humans or animals, is when it comes to cannabis, what does the science say? What does the body of evidence point to as cannabis being able to benefit? And so it's such a common question that I came up with an acronym to help people understand the medical benefits of cannabis. So that acronym is PAINS. So it's spelled PAINS. And it's a really easy way to remember. So it stands for pain, anxiety, inflammation, nausea, and appetite loss, and seizures. So PAINS. Because by far the biggest use of medical cannabis is for chronic pain. And so, when you think pain for cannabis, think PAINS, the acronym: pain, anxiety, inflammation, nausea, seizures. Now,
That's amazing.
that's not to say that those are the only uses. There are some other uses that people are looking into and studying, but that's just the most common uses, and it's the easiest way to remember it.
That's awesome. Yeah, because both of our dogs are rescues, they both have really unique personalities. Like one of them is super high anxiety and the other one is just like happy to be here, but then we'll follow the other one around. Like Jackson is definitely the leader. And then you've got Oscar, who's just like happy to be around Oscar. But Jackson, we don't know exactly what his trauma history was, but he's got 2 huge bumps on the top of his head. And so we think he must have been abused because he's terrified of men, but likes women. It's just how he is. And so we use CBD, like even if he's just going to come with me to the office, like we've tried to socialize him, but we use CBD as a way to try to make that getting to know new environments thing maybe a little bit easier. But thank you for the PAINS tips. I love that. So speaking of holidays more specifically, it's funny, you were sharing with us off camera that you used to work in the ER and that you would see a spike in cases during holiday seasons for pets coming in with all kinds of things. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that experience so the audience can maybe learn some helpful holiday tips for their pets?
Yeah, so during the holiday season, the cases that come into the ER, a lot of times it's for getting into things that they shouldn't have. So, for example, getting into the trash, pulling things off the countertops, things like that. And so, we always want to remind people that there are certain things that humans are perfectly good to eat. It's perfectly safe, but for animals, it affects them different. So, things like chocolate, that's going to be toxic to them. Grapes, raisins, that's going to be toxic to them. Certain things like macadamia nuts, also a sweetener that's used in a lot of human products called xylitol. That is actually really toxic to dogs. So you want to make sure that they definitely don't get into anything that contains xylitol, or that they're not accidentally given anything that contains xylitol. And then when it comes to, a lot of times during the holidays, people will eat turkey. We always want to remember that cooked bones, they tend to splinter when they're chewed on. So that's something that you definitely want to make sure that your pets avoid, because there's always a danger of eating cooked bones that splinter, and splintered bones in the GI tract does not make for a pretty picture.
I feel like we need to turn this into a written downloadable list for folks, because I just feel like all of those risks, especially the xylitol one, I didn't know about. I definitely knew about chocolate and the turkey and the bones things. But I didn't know that thing about xylitol. Oh my gosh. When you were working in the ER, was that kind of the most common concern during the holidays, is that the pets that were coming in usually just got into something they weren't supposed to?
Yeah, that was pretty common, especially getting into the trash because, people will have, leftovers that they throw away. And you definitely want to make sure that they stay out of the trash because a lot of times, especially if it's, old expired food, or if it's something that's, really greasy, then there's always a risk of pancreatitis. And so with pancreatitis, that can sometimes be really severe. So you want to make sure definitely that you keep the trash away from them and lock it up, make sure they can't get into that.
Mm. Can I ask a question that we didn't actually prepare for at all, that now I'm just starting to think about? So when it comes to New Year's Eve fireworks, that's just what I thought about when I was talking about 4th of July. And I was like, yeah, you know what? New Year's Eve has tons of fireworks too. So what is your recommendation on CBD, I guess, management for higher anxiety dogs? Would you say just maybe administer the CBD like an hour or two before fireworks typically might start in your area? Or are you thinking like all day long so that they can kind of maintain us, get their endocannabinoid system? I don't know, I'm just making this up, but like warmed up for a calmer evening, midnight kind of thing?
Yeah, good question. So, and that ties into the appropriate dose for the specific animal. And it's similar to humans. It can vary quite a bit. And so what we've seen in the pharmacokinetic studies is that the way that each individual metabolizes and absorbs cannabinoids like CBD, it can differ. So, some dogs may require less, some dogs may require more. So what we always recommend is, especially like 4th of July, is to not try to figure it out the evening of the fireworks. Is try to figure out a couple days before, because sometimes you will have to adjust the dosage based off of that individual's response and that individual's endocannabinoid system. So some may need less, some may need more. So what I always recommend is try to figure it out starting from a couple days before, because that way if you if you need to adjust the dosage upwards, that you do so. And then depending on where people are at, sometimes in places like LA, fireworks are always going off, so it doesn't matter if it's like in the middle of the day. Sometimes you'll hear fireworks, so sometimes it may just be more beneficial to have them on that regimen for a full 24 or 48 hours, depending on your city, depending on your surroundings. But each individual can vary, and especially in terms of like how long it lasts in their system. But generally what we see is that after they take it, the peak effects will be within 1 to 2 hours. And then in general, it'll last for about 8 to 12 hours.
Got it. No, that's really good advice. Like kind of prep them to get a sense of what game day is going to be like, if you will.
Yep.
That's so cool. Okay, so last question on this topic is, when you're thinking about products and specifically formulation, have you seen, I guess, last two questions, swear. Have you seen a better performance with the treats in terms of bioavailability and absorption or an impact? Or would you advocate a little bit more for tinctures, or maybe a mixture of both because everyone's system is different?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, there hasn't been that much data that goes into that. But what we have seen is that when they're ingesting it, and if they're eating it with a meal, then that could potentially help to increase the absorption. In terms of, so right now, the way that we formulate it is we do it through tinctures. We actually haven't done treats yet, because one of the things that we talked about earlier is that every individual can be different. So, for example, one dog, one cat may be better with 5 milligrams or 7.5 milligrams of CBD. And when you're using a tincture, that's really easy to be able to adjust that accurately and be able to give that consistently. But when you're actually using a treat, it's a little bit harder to be able to find a specific amount and break it up into an exact amount, and then also to ensure the homogeneity. So what can happen is when you're making an edible product, unless you blend it really thoroughly, what happens is you may have certain portions of cannabinoids that are located in certain areas of the treat or the edible product. So with an edible product, you always want to make sure it's very homogeneous, meaning that the cannabinoids are really well blended throughout. So no matter what portion of a piece that you take off, whether it's from this end or that end, you get the exact same amount or concentration of cannabinoids. But that's why we've done the tinctures for years now, is because the ability to adjust that dose and to be able to pull up that dose accurately each and every time.
Okay, that makes complete sense. And on the topic of tinctures then, is there a preferred or recommended carrier oil that you see be a better performance for pets specifically? I see a lot of salmon oil. I see a lot of olive oil, hemp seed oil. I don't see a lot of MCT, surprisingly, but I don't know if that's a dog thing or maybe it's just where I shop.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of what we've done was we've always used olive oil for the past 6 years. It's worked really well for us. There haven't really been studies that have looked at the specific different carrier oils and seeing what may work better and what may not. What's really interesting though is there was one paper that addressed the different chains of the fatty acids, and what they came to the conclusion is that if it's blended with something that has longer chain fatty acids, so something like olive oil, then you could potentially get better absorption of cannabinoids because of the way that the oils are absorbed through the GI tract, whereas the MCT oils, their chains are shorter. And they're actually absorbed in a different route than the traditional oils are. So some of that evidence points to longer chain fatty acids like olive oil being superior to MCT oil. But in terms of an actual study that's looked at all the different carrier oils and compared them head to head with the cannabinoids and then looking at the pharmacokinetics of the absorption, there hasn't really been any large study that's looked at that.
That's interesting. And then in terms of application of tinctures as a topical, have you heard about that? Has that ever really been done? Like if my pup has like a sore on his paw and it's not anything like ER worthy, but maybe just he's been bugging, kind of looking at it or like messing with it. Is it weird to put a tincture directly on the spot as long as it's nothing like needing to take to the doctor right now? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, first and foremost is whenever, you see something weird on your pet's skin, is always to have your veterinarian check it out. Because a lot of times sometimes it can be impossible just by looking at it to determine what it is. Sometimes you may have to take samples of it, look at it under the microscope, do different diagnostic tests to determine what's going on. Now, in terms of topical applications for the skin, people have done that. We have had some pet owners apply it topically to the skin. It's olive oil, so it's a completely safe and healthy oil to apply to the skin. In terms of actual uses of topical cannabinoids for certain conditions, that's actually something that we're exploring right now, because one of the remarkable things is that we do know that skin cells actually do have cannabinoid receptors. And so there are some potential benefits for different skin conditions that could it could utilize cannabinoids, especially when it comes to things like inflammation.
Okay, that's awesome. I swear, those are all my probably self-provided questions because I have the 2 pups at home. But thank you for answering them all. This has been so productive. Is there anything else that you thought would be relevant to mention before we wrap up here? And if not, definitely at least let the audience know where they can find you, where they can follow you, and get more information about you and VETCBD.
Yeah, it's what I always tell people is that we're at one of the most remarkable points in medicine, because it's all the other body systems, whether it's the endocrine system, the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, we've known about for a very, very long time. But when it comes to the endocannabinoid system, this is a huge system that exists throughout all vertebrate animals. So mammals, fish, birds, reptiles, humans, we all have endocannabinoid systems. And for this to be a recent discovery is something that's incredibly fascinating. And we are at the tip of a very, very large iceberg when it comes to understanding the endocannabinoid system and the potential of cannabinoid therapeutics. We don't know how big this iceberg is, but we know it's a very big iceberg and we're just at the tip of it. So we're just scratching the surface, and that's one of the most remarkable things to be a part of.
Very exciting. Okay, so where can folks find more information about you and VETCBD?
Sure, they can check us out at vetcbd.com or vetcbdhemp.com.
Awesome. And what is your Instagram again? We'll also be able to drop this in the notes somewhere.
Yeah, it's one of them's at VETCBD and the other one's at VETCBDHemp.
Very cool. Okay, Dr. Shu, this has been so amazing. I feel very prepared for New Year's Eve. And I also feel like very prepared. When we were chatting about your animals getting into things that they're not supposed to be getting into, I was immediately taken back to Thanksgiving dinner. My dog like hopped up on the buffet table is at a height that he can't reach, but he hopped up on a bench that's next to the buffet table that allowed him to start licking the tablecloth. And like both me and some of my friends, like we rushed over, like, don't eat that. It was actually a very funny moment. You had to be there. Okay. So anyway, I really just want to say I appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise and wisdom. And thank you for leading the conversation around pets and their endocannabinoid system health. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign us off. This is Michelle with CANiVISION, one network, many voices. Thanks so much.